Hello and welcome to the Mercer Gallery and our exhibition Vision and Labour Making Comics, the Art of Avery Hill Publishing. I'm Ricky Miller, co-publisher at Avery Hill. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Avery Hill, and then there will be some clips of some of our creators talking about their work, which will be much more interesting than me, so stick around. The first thing you need to understand about Avery Hill is that we all have day jobs and do Avery Hill part-time. It's a hobby that got out of control and we're doing our best to figure out how to do it on a daily basis. We didn't come from a traditional publishing background. We basically knew nothing and had to figure it out as we went. We had to first learn how to make books, then learn how to tell people about them, and then learn about distributors and sales and marketing and printers and all the other things that go into getting the books into as many hands as possible. You'll see information about how we do that around the exhibition, so I won't go into it too much here. Instead, I'll tell you about the bit before that, how we choose the books. The first thing is to say that we don't identify particular books that we want to publish, we identify creators that we want to work with. It's the people that we're interested in. We are always looking for new creators, and often in the past it's just been one or two images that they posted on the internet that gets our attention and makes us think. That's how we found Tillie, Walden, Zoe Thorogood, before they'd ever put out a comic, and they've gone on to be two of our more successful creators who you'll see around the exhibition. When we've identified a creator that we're interested in, we ask them what they want to make, what's a book that excites them the most, and that's the one that we do. Our aim is to realize the vision of the artist. That might not always be the most commercially successful way of doing things, but if we just try to put out books that we thought would be successful, we'd find that boring, and also most of the time we will probably be wrong. Part of the joy of this is when suddenly a book or a creator that we love, but that we thought was just going to find a small audience, suddenly takes off, and you realize that a lot of other people like them too. That's our job, that's why we do what we do, that's why we built Avery Hill, all of this, putting out work that other publishers don't put out and trying to get it to as many people as possible. Making comics is hard work, it's solitary, it's laborious. Publishing them can often feel the same. Sometimes we feel like we never want to publish another book, often maybe. But then a new creator comes along who excites us all over again and we begin anew. That is what keeps us going and why we do this, and you're going to see many of those creators who have excited us over the years in the clips that follow and throughout this exhibition. Thank you for coming. We hope you enjoy it.
One of the main characteristics of this book is the pace and the fact that you didn't rush. Well, yeah, you could say rush, but the fact is it was being released episodically. It was like one chapter a week, so you had deadlines which you haven't had before or since in the same kind of way for episodes. So, and whatever was going on in your life, you hit that, and I mean that's and some of those chapters, like I remember 40 or 50 page chapters coming out for which you had done.
I remember it got longer. Yeah, the process for the book was like really, really wild and fast, which I think reflects some of the energy in the narrative, because I feel like I haven't read the comic in a long time, but what I remember is that each chapter there's like a sense of propulsion, like the story really does move.
Yeah, I kind of went back through all of our emails from that time period, and you did send me a document with, like, this was just at the very beginning, which you'd already has all the characters. It has all the first 12 chapters, I think, which is probably where you got to with the storyline, which is why we had to suddenly halfway through go, oh, okay, where is the rest of this going?
That's crazy. I don't remember planning anything. I just remember feeling like I have no idea where Grace is. Like, I know two girls will go to school and fall in love. And I know that one of them's going to disappear, but I have no idea why she's going to disappear. Which was actually a really fun way to write, to be like, because just like the audience doesn't know what happened to Grace, I also did not know. I remember the most riveting thing on this page for me was not drawing it, but coloring it. And when I realized I should put orange on the trees. I mean, if we think of the color work I've done to this date, I've only ever done 1, maybe 2 colors at most. Sunbeam is the book where I learned to color. And it was one of the few times I remember working on a page and feeling like it came alive in the colors, not in the inks, because usually I feel like my pages come alive in the inking stage.
My name is Charlot, and I'm the illustrator and author of What We Don't Talk About.
It was quite a different kind of drawing to what interested me. I wasn't inspired to do it because it just wasn't what made me tick as a person. It was really, I think it was really when I realized it was cartoon characters that just somehow just got really interested. I was like, oh, this is so exciting. You can create characters. They can walk in their own world, and you know, they can be about anything. I think that was what really excited me. It's an idea that's been in my head for a long time. I wanted to write about it, particularly because of my own experience of growing up in an interracial family, and some of the frustration I had, I wanted to kind of put out there. But also, I suppose, watching how people have handled the topic in say, in movies. I haven't seen it so much in comics, actually. I don't think I have really come across it that much. And it's just very glossing over a lot of issues that actually happen within the relationship. Both my parents are not the very sort of kind of confrontational people. So a lot of things just didn't get discussed. And it's very confusing as a kid growing up and seeing that kind of treatment, and then no one sitting down and being like, that's wrong what just happened.
The book is about a woman called Maggie who is a space scientist. And she's at a very interesting point in her career. She's 60 and she has just undergone the biggest mission of her life, the biggest sort of career milestone. But it didn't go according to plan. And she is now in this position where she's got to give a lecture to a group of young women who are interested in STEM, interested in science. And she's got to go and give this talk based on this sort of monumental thing that's just happened to her. And she's scared of doing it. So she is having some therapy to sort of deal with her panic attacks. She's also got bipolar disorder, and she is dealing with a recent breakup, which was sort of quite heartbreaking in a way that she's not really yet even able to address.
Lizzy, how did you approach the sort of visual style of the book? Because there's different styles for different sections.
So I was just presented with this beautiful script that was like very structurally sound, and so the separate sections, although in a script they kind of bleed into one another, they were so clear. Like the lecture theatre as a setting, the mood of that room, that had a very clear vibe, I guess. And then the therapy is obviously more intimate. So I went from a simplified palette of kind of just orange for the colour of the room, and then to therapy, which is softer and more intimate and a conversation. So that's all drawn in coloured pencil and has more colours, so is more related to real life, I suppose. And then to flashbacks, which are all blue toned, I think, through to the depression section, I suppose, which suddenly felt weird to treat that in the same kind of clean way that I treated some of the other stuff, which was drawn by hand but coloured digitally. So that ended up being kind of painted in ink, because it felt I guess more tender, I suppose.
So this is a 500-page, or almost 500-page, choose your own adventure book with lots of different paths that the reader can go down, all these different directions. I'm really curious, what was your process for planning this out? I mean, I'm imagining sort of Post-its everywhere and scraps of paper and sort of maps and stuff.
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly it. I didn't really have like a plan going in. I had like a script that I wrote in Word. Yeah, and then I just started doing it. I had a lot of, I was drawing maps. I did have a lot of notes on my phone because something would like come to me when I was like cleaning or something. So I really just kind of like got it all out first, and then did a lot of revising and a lot of tweaking. And that's where all like the notes and the planning, and I had these like diagrams with like arrows going everywhere. I've been playing a lot of old games lately, not so much to like actually play them, but to just kind of get, I don't know, like inspiration on how they worked from like a technical angle, right? And how you could tell a story through like really limited tech limitations of the time, right? Really, really old choose your adventure games from like the 80s. They only had like 2 or 3 colors. They were really bare bones, just like text and image. And I found them when I was working on Internet Crusader. I found like this like archive of DOS games on the Internet Archive, and I thought that was really interesting. Like I was playing a bunch of them, and I thought like the storytelling was really cool. Like how you could just kind of tell a story just by making like a simple choice and having an image, and that's where that kind of came from for this book.
I'm Zoe Thorogood. I make comics, and this is my debut graphic novel. It's called The Impending Blindness of Billy Scott, and it's about a young artist named Billy who has her debut gallery exhibition opening in a few months, but within a few weeks she'll be blind. Billy is this extremely reclusive artist. She doesn't have many friends, she doesn't have much else besides art, so when the only thing she has is stripped away from her suddenly, she is propelled into action, and she sets off on this journey. Her goal is to find 10 people to paint that she finds interesting, and as she's doing this, she's dealing with her impending blindness and how she's going to cope after the fact. The whole thing was drawn by hand. Here are some pages. Colouring is all done digitally, and I use a lot of screen tone.
My first book with Avery Hill was Follow Me In, which is autobiographical. It's a travelogue, and it tells the story of 6 months that I spent travelling around Mexico in my mid-20s. I travelled across the whole country over that 6 months, so there's a lot of stuff about Mexico itself in the book, but also interspersed with the travel stuff. There's a lot of personal storylines. It tells the story of the relationship that I was in at the time. I was coming to terms with the fact that my partner at the time was an alcoholic, and there's all sorts of sort of personal stuff weaving in through the travel storylines. I drew Follow Me In on paper with pencil, and then I coloured it in Photoshop. I very much like how digital colouring and drawing help speed up the comics drawing process, but I always want my work to kind of still have an analogue look to it and look like it was drawn with traditional media. My second book for Avery Hill was Breakwater, which was my first foray into writing fiction. It ended up being set in a real place. This cinema on the seafront in Brighton was a building that I worked in when I was really young, but the rest of the story was fiction. I got quite interested in the idea of workplaces in my writing. I spent almost 20 years working at the National Theatre in London as an evening job, which allowed me to make my books and do other work during the day. And an ushering job, whether it's theatre or cinema, has a really unusual pace. There's a lot of downtime and a lot of time where you're sort of thrown together with people from a lot of different walks of life, and you spend a lot of time getting to know them. So it's quite an unusual kind of working experience, and I wanted to capture that in this book. It's a book about making friends as an adult, about mental health, and about setting boundaries. I drew this one using Procreate on the iPad, but again, I wanted that sort of traditional media look, so I used a lot of pencil and charcoal tools so that it didn't look digital. And I have another book coming out next year, which I drew in Procreate again. This one will be full colour, and it's a sort of painterly style, so I used a lot of paintbrushes for that one. My books sort of explore the lives of characters navigating the contemporary world, and just sort of trying to figure out how to live, how to be happy. So there's a lot of stuff about family and relationships and friendships and work.
Hello, I'm Donya. At the heart of this comic is a supernatural family saga, dark fairy tale, a sort of folkloric journey into motherhood. I'm going to read a short passage from the prologue to give you a taster. The reckoning begins. The worms of the earth writhe and boil and churn. This is the story of the witch and her daughters, the haunted, hateful bird, and the prophecy of the Worm King. A little example of how I use tarot cards to help me tell narratives. The foolish man, the spirit of the ether, recklessness, naivety. Witch cat Earthy makes a poor decision, makes a deal with the devil. And then my character meets an angel, an empress from another dimension. All's well for a while. There are consequences, a curse. It takes great fortitude and strength of character and a massive journey between the ruin and the characters reconciling their story.
It's a science fiction story set in a solar system where we follow the life of a young girl who grows up and becomes a young woman, and she lives with her family who are originally from a different part of the solar system, from a planet on the opposite side, and they were displaced by a nuclear event. So she grows up on this mining colony, and every 3 years she can see her home planet, which is kind of irradiated and mysterious and a kind of no-go zone, and it appears in her sky every 3 years. So we check in with her every 3 years as she grows up and kind of yearns for this place in the universe, whether it's with her family on the home that they've built, or kind of reaching out into the unknown to this planet that she isn't sure of but has kind of always been there her whole life. But yeah, with Retrograde Orbit, in terms of writing, character design, all the kind of sets and setting and world building, and figuring all the kind of mechanics of the world and the technology of the world, that, yeah, it was a pretty large task compared to what I'd done previously, certainly in comics.
I didn't know much about her until I came across her in a tennis book that I was reading, and I found out all the kind of like headline bits and pieces about, you know, like she had this like 180 match winning streak. She drank cognac at the change of ends. The way she dressed, you know, sort of inspired the flapper aesthetic, and all of these sort of big things. And then the more I sort of delved into reading about her, there were all of these things about her relationship with her father and the cruelty of both of her parents. I just found her a fascinating individual. I think the more I read about her, the more I got to understand her, or a version of her at least, because she never got to write about her life in this way, because she died before she turned 40, and so you're often reading about her through other people's words, but you're trying to read between the lines about it as well and try and figure out who that person is.
I think they're almost opposite processes. Like doing a non-fiction piece, you're whittling down from all the possibilities to something focused, and then creating something that's fictional, you're kind of possibly starting with one tiny germ of an idea and then trying to grow something from it.
Yeah, that was the thing that was maybe most nerve-wracking about Suzanne, was I was able to do all of that research and really get into the weeds on the structure and the outline, and know exactly why various scenes needed to be where they were, and I could sort of justify every decision I made. And then when it came to the writing the script, I was really terrified about how do I write these scenes I've invented, and how do I make them all flow and make sense and feel like the people that I've been reading about all this time. But yeah, that was the stuff I found the most rewarding and I got so much out of, and it definitely has given me more confidence to go forward with just writing pure fiction, because I really enjoyed that part of it, and I definitely felt like moments of sitting at my desk and couldn't wait to sort of just dive into the world and lose myself in these conversations.
The Outer Wilderness. It's the third instalment in the Wilderness series, which started with the Internal Wilderness, followed by Desolation Wilderness, and the Outer Wilderness will be a more galactic journey through time and space. Each book works as a standalone publication, but also works as part of a collection. The books themselves feel quite special, printed on a lovely paper stock which has a really tactile quality, along with their pocket-sized format, I think it really works to form that intimate experience you can get when connecting with a visual world. The Outer Wilderness will be reaching out to the more unknown or projected interpretations of possible worlds in the microcosm of the universe, which is inspired by both science fiction and fact. I've been exploring these landscapes in an altogether more otherworldly way. I've always been curious about what happens beyond the confines of a page, but in this book I'm looking out from the confines of our reality, past the boundaries of the known universe and into a much more speculative territory. Referencing how other worlds have been visualised in the past, like old B movies of Martian landscapes, you know how they would start with an earthly familiarity but play with scale, colour and form to bring in elements into a much more fantastical realm. So there's a sense of fun that needs to be enjoyed when looking at these images. When I'm drawing them out, sometimes I create little explanations for what is in each scene. I might give myself a little warning to be careful when swimming in this particular lagoon. Though its waters have near miraculous healing properties, you might not survive an encounter with the creatures that lay beneath.
I did fine art at uni, and it wasn't until Scott Pilgrim came out and my boyfriend at the time was reading it, and he was like, yeah, it's kind of like about life and about being 22 and I was like, 23, I think, Scott Pilgrim. I think I was 22 when I read Scott Pilgrim, so I remember thinking, wow, he's kind of my age. And I read the first one, and then the penny just dropped. I was like, geez, comics can just be about anything. Like, why have I never thought this before? So then I just started inhaling comics after that. I've always wanted to make stories that were kind of joyful. I just want just to make people laugh, and I want, people to read my stories and feel better for them, and I think that's a lot harder to do. It's easier to make something really horrible, but to make something really warm and joyful is I think harder, but more rewarding, I think, for me at least.
The Hard Switch. It's a bit of a departure for me, as it's science fiction, which I've long been a fan of for its rich visuals and potential to say important things about our current times. At its centre is a very simple story of found family and what lines we cross for the things that matter to us. We follow a small ship's crew as they try and make their way through a galaxy facing seismic change due to a dwindling mineral resource. I found designing an entire world, even if we only get to see a thin slice of it, to be a bit of a mammoth task. I wanted to ensure that all the little details and characters were just right before placing them within the story. A lot of hours have gone into this book, and I hope you can see that in the different planets, places, interesting characters, ships and everyday objects that pepper the world I've designed. It's not like a strict process, and I don't really think about it, but it has always been the same for every project I've undertaken, and it always kind of starts with a kind of visual start point, and I see it as almost like a placeholder. I'll draw quite a well-rendered single image. In the case of this one, there's a page which features one of the characters sat at a kiosk at night in this kind of edge of the galaxy spaceport, and I was kind of intrigued by the image I'd created and why I'd created it and who that character would be and why she would be there, and all my projects seem to start in that way of sort of creating a sort of miniature snapshot within a world, and then I start answering those questions that I just outlined there.
So it sounds like the idea for Barking was sort of percolating, and you had a story you wanted to write about, but you weren't sure at first what approach to take. Is that right? Or did you always know that you wanted it to be a comic?
No, I wasn't sure. I was doing hand-drawn animation, and I was toying with the idea of it being an animation, but I was getting pretty fed up with the industry, to be honest. It's a really hard one, and everyone expects you to work for free. And I just thought, well, if I'm going to work for free, I may as well be completely in charge of what I'm doing. And it sounds like quite a megalomaniac way, but I love the way with comics it's entirely yours, and that you make all those decisions, and that really appealed to me, and not really a fan of kind of design by committee creative work. So yeah, and I think because it's so personal, I just couldn't understand the idea of collaborating on it. It was knew it was going to be about my own experience of depression and grief, and yeah, comics felt like the natural medium. And once I started reading more modern comics and started finding graphic medicine, and it seemed just the perfect media for it, really.
I always knew that I wanted to be an artist, and I love to like write things as well. And I was like, oh my God, I could be a comic artist, and then you get to do both. And that was so exciting to me. B.Mure is something that has existed in one form or another since I was like 15 or something like that, although it's very different back then. I think probably the world, I would say, is the thing that's remained the most sort of consistent, even though I never fully knew what it was going to look like. It's always been these kind of like higgledy-piggledy buildings, and the idea that there's this like city that has like some kind of mundane element of magic to it, but is also like bureaucratic, quite heavily political. Weird forms of government was always interesting to me, which I think, being a person who grew up in Britain, is it's there all the time. So it was like both topics that I wanted to tackle and getting into the world as well. I've always thought of B.Mure as this sort of like society on like the cusp of massive industrialization. I sort of see Ed as like quite naive, quite into his own stuff, and definitely initially it's like, oh no, I don't want to get involved with this, which for me is some of the level of discomfort for like a lot of people who live lives that are comfortable, where there's a degree of like, not complacency, but like, but I've got my own things to do and I don't want to think about that.
So it's kind of based on the archives of this guy called George Ives. How did you find out about him, and could you tell us a little bit about him?
Well, I was at this pub in 2008 and it had a bookshelf, and because I used to sit there and not talk to people, I would investigate the bookshelf, and on the bookshelf was this book about him, and it was called Man Bites Man, and in it are some of the most interesting newspaper clippings he collected. He collected newspaper clippings from like something stupid like 1912, like right up until right before he died in the 50s, and he had all these volumes of scrapbooks full of all these newspaper clippings, and this book was just a small amount of them, separated into chapters like nature and strange people, and it was amazing. It was like when you happen across something that's exactly your taste and wouldn't appeal to anyone else.
I'm always amazed by this ability to create this really, really kind of surreal visual imagery, because I'm not very good at it. I'm just stuck with this realistic mode of storytelling. And I think I discovered that I've got aphantasia, which means a lack of mental visual imagery. I kind of think in concepts, and I kind of have an idea of how I want something to look, but I can't make it weird and crazy. So I'm always amazed that people can do that. Do you have a really rich visual imagination?
Yeah, it's too much sometimes. It feels like I almost see a page in nearly everything. Or if I hear something, like even what were we watching the other day? Chris Packham, the nature wildlife guy, and he was talking about how he went in this pond to track down these raft spiders, and he was talking about being like up to his shoulders in this pond, and that he could feel all the kind of the dragonfly larvae kind of like nibbling at his side. Like, how can that not be a page? I mean, how can I not use it?
Adrift on a Painted Sea is a book about my mum. Throughout her life, she'd painted as a hobby, and when she died, she left behind an enormous body of work, which filled drawers and cupboards in her old home. I wanted to find a way of showing her paintings to a new audience, particularly the ones that focused on the sea, which was a place where she was always happy to spend time.
Because your books sometimes do have slightly different styles from one project to the next.
Yeah.
What's that process like?
I ended up drawing this book completely digitally in Clip Studio, and I have a sort of a love-hate relationship, I think, with digital drawing. It simplifies the process a lot, because the way I write is, I guess I kind of make it up as I go along a little bit. So having it digitally means I can move things around really easily. So I can almost like chop up the panels and put them into different pages and things. I think I ended up working on this one digitally just for the simplicity and flexibility of it. But I think it works because it's quite nice and clean, and it works with quite a nice contrast to the paintings.
That's what I was just thinking. I think that works really well in that the paintings have a really tactile and sort of physical feel to them, and then the comics parts have a very different feel. I think that works. That's a really nice contrast.
I really like drawing by hand, but then I find with a comics panel, it's so small that it's quite hard to use like a paintbrush or a dip pen to work on something that small. So unless you're like really working on a larger scale and reducing it.
Comics is just such a demanding sort of format that it's quite hard to find a way to do comics that's actually achievable. And
definitely over a book length comic, I think you have to make choices that are going to just let you finish it.